Good morning. Thanks for joining us on a Monday and kicking off your Thanksgiving week with us. I'm Savannah Sellers. Joe's off this morning. We're going to begin with President-elect Donald Trump rapidly filling out his administration with his picks. Trump has tapped right-leaning think tank President Brooke Rollins to lead the Agriculture Department and hedge fund executive Scott Bessent to serve as Treasury Secretary. The pair join a list of controversial picks expected to face pushback during the Senate confirmation process. That includes his selection for Attorney General. We've talked about this one, Pam Bondi, who, among other things, has promoted false claims about the outcome of the 2020 election. Also, Director of National Intelligence nominee, that's Tulsi Gabbard, and questions over her ties to foreign adversaries. And Defense Department nominee Pete Hegseth, who has come under fire for an alleged sexual assault in 2017, which he denies and was not charged in, but did pay a settlement to his accuser. For more, we are joined on set by NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Great to have you with us. So I want to start with these confirmation processes and what might happen here. There's some bipartisan criticism of some of these picks, but walk us through exactly what would need to happen for any of them to be held up. I mean, how much power could Democrats, for example, really have to hold any of this up?
Right. The confirmation process requires a simple majority in the U.S. Senate, and there's currently going to be 53 Republican senators. So theoretically, if you're looking to get confirmed, you could lose the support of every Democrat and then 3 Republican senators. But there's several of these individuals, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell included, who may be roadblocks to some of these nominees. It's in large part why we saw Matt Gaetz, the Attorney General picked by Donald Trump, ultimately take his name out of the running out of concerns that he wasn't going to be able to get those 51 votes. And if you were a Pete Hegseth or a Tulsi Gabbard or even a RFK, right, that is where some of the concern is, in some cases, bipartisan. And, you may, though, also like the Labor Secretary pick that Donald Trump put forward, may actually have the support of some Democrats, but not Republicans. So this is a really interesting math game here that we're going to be watching play out here for these next 2 months.
As we prepare to head into the confirmation stage, there is also a fight playing out over the vetting process here for some of these nominees. Tell us about this.
Right. Typically, through the transition process, there are memorandums of understanding that are signed between the transition team of the incoming presidential administration and the GSA in Washington, D.C., which opens up not only a pipeline of money to go to the transition so they can fund offices and they can essentially stand up a transition operation. But the other big part is ultimately FBI background checks and security clearances. And the Trump transition team right now, 3 weeks after his election, is still foregoing using the resources of the FBI background checks, which not only is of concern to senators up on Capitol Hill that are going to be the ones voting to confirm, but also there's questions like Pete Hegseth. He was named the Pentagon nominee, but it was in the days that followed that sexual assault allegation that came out from a Monterey police department in Colorado or in California. So this is where some of the concerns are about what the FBI may have on some of these individuals in their file that the Trump transition team doesn't know about, and senators up on Capitol Hill don't either.
Vaughn, our viewers may remember something called Project 2025, something that the president had disavowed, the president-elect, I should say, had disavowed, but it's come into play a little bit here. Remind us what that is and what the connection is now, what we're seeing play out.
Right. It was a 900-page book that was essentially a template for not only the what would be a Trump transition, but also a second Trump White House. And it was 900 pages. It was authored by a litany of former Trump administration officials. And when it came out, Donald Trump tried to distance himself because polling suggested that Americans were not too fond of some of the policy proposals inside of it. And yet many of these were key allies of his. Well, fast forward here since his election, a great many of those very authors who were involved in that project are coming in to work in his administration. The latest one, on Friday night, he tapped Russ Vought, who is going to be his OMB director, who is one of those key authors. It's talked about the executive use of the presidency. He is going to be brought into the administration. So while Donald Trump is campaigning, try to distance himself from the project, he's doing exactly what a lot of Democrats said would likely happen, and that is he's utilizing not only the work that they produced, but also those personnel individuals that were behind the project for his next administration.
And is there a concern moving forward? Like, what if this were to be followed to an extent, what could happen next?
I think that this is where, for Donald Trump has even said himself, is that in his first administration, they felt like they ultimately were not able to work as efficiently. because they were new to Washington. They brought in a lot of newcomers, a lot of new voices. And the reason why Project 2025 could be so useful to him and his administration is that it is an outline of how each department and federal government agency can be more efficiently run. Essentially, it's an outline about how they can make use of their next 4 years in office more efficiently. And that is why, for Donald Trump, it could be very beneficial, because it is an exact kind of an agenda of how they can go and actually get the work done that they've long campaigned and talked about.
Von Hilliard, thank you for kicking us off this hour. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Well, as the president-elect's cabinet takes shape, some top Democrats are speaking out about the nominees in the incoming administration, as Von just laid out. NBC News Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker has more.
Hello there, Savannah. This week on Meet the Press, I spoke to Senator-elect Adam Schiff about how he will vote on President-elect Trump's cabinet picks as a new senator. Let me ask you big pictures. Obviously, President-elect Trump has now said he wants to pick Pam Bondi to serve as his attorney general. He has swept the battleground states. He won the popular vote. Republicans have control of the House and of the Senate. Do you think that the president-elect should have his picks confirmed?
Well, I think the president has a right to nominate anyone who's qualified, who has good judgment and good character. It doesn't mean he's guaranteed Senate approval of whoever he nominates, and some of these nominees are deeply problematic. I'll be interested in the confirmation process. Will Pam Bondi continue to tell the big lie even under oath? Is she going to continue to say that the Justice Department should be prosecuting prosecutors who brought valid evidence before a grand jury found probable cause to believe Donald Trump committed crimes? That's not a basis to go after them. So she's going to have to answer tough questions. Tulsi Gabbard concerns me a great deal, that someone who has echoed Kremlin talking points, someone who has appeared to make common cause with someone like Bashar al-Assad, who gasses his own people, someone who has no experience whatsoever, not even on the Intelligence Committee in the Congress, should be running those agencies. So they're going to have tough questions to answer.
You can see my full interview and a lot more at MeetThePress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press here on NBC News Now every weekday at 4 p.m.
All right, Kristen Welker, thank you so much. Well, with lawmakers like Senator-elect Adam Schiff already bracing for tough confirmation battles, we wanted to bring in NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd to dig further into this, talk about some of these picks. Chuck, always great to have you with us. Good morning. So you wrote this column, you talked about this political capital concept, that President-elect Trump is using this capital when it comes to these more controversial cabinet picks. We saw, of course, what happened already with Matt Gaetz. He withdrew his nomination. But we've got these other controversial ones still, right? Even when it comes to Republicans, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, they're still in the running for these respective nominations. Do you think it's worth it, the way that this is playing out, for Mr. Trump to have to keep kind of using this capital, making these personal calls to people on the Hill for these picks?
Well, I think what he's doing is he's accelerating what political capital he needs to use for personnel. And the question is, when you look at the realistic chances he has at passing major legislation, he's got one term, which means he's going to be a lame duck in the last 2 years of his one term. These are two sort of, think of it as sort of like there's two-year terms, sort of mini terms here for him. And the first 2 years, just like Joe Biden, is going to be filled with trying to get this big tax revision of the tax code done and made permanent. And he's likely to make it one giant bill, right? When you have these narrow majorities in Congress, you have to do it that way. Well, that's going to be a lot of political capital that he's going to have to use to get that stuff passed. Just remember how tough it was for Joe Biden. There's going to be plenty of people who play the role of Joe Manchin on the Republican side. So he's got all that to do. The longer he spends trying to convince Republicans to walk the plank on some of these nominees that, while in the moment may not be as negative in the polls, but over time may become politically problematic, he makes it that much harder to get his agenda passed. So that's the thing, and I think that they're not seeing the long-term game here. But Donald Trump has always been Mr. Short-term.
I think Gaetz withdrawing his nomination, you know, I think Mr. Trump has made kind of a name for himself, prides himself in not really backing down from something. But if you just don't have the votes, he doesn't have the votes. And I understand he called Gaetz with the news that he did not have those votes in the Senate to be confirmed. Do you think that the way that situation unfolded Could we see a repeat of that? Would it make Mr. Trump reconsider some of his other controversial cabinet picks, like let's talk about Pete Hegseth, in order to avoid the chance that they will not be confirmed, or that he even kind of calls it in prior?
Well, you know, Savannah, loyalty is one way with him. And I say that, and I think Matt Gaetz knew that going in. Look, he will fight until he decides it's not worth the fight. I mean, and I think that when it comes to Gaetz and Hegseth, doing both of them at the same time was going to get quite difficult. But, you know, I would be surprised if every single nominee he has now all get sworn in. I assume one or two more end up, for one reason or the other. You know, he could sour on them himself. He may not like how things are going. And I think both Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth, let's see how these confirmation hearings themselves go. And if they don't go well, he's willing to pull the plug on people if he doesn't think they're good enough to fight.
Chuck, you mentioned the word loyalty. In some ways, these picks seem to be challenging that concept, right, for some Republican members of Congress, on whether their loyalty to Trump can overrule essentially what they think is best for the government before he's even started this second term. Walk us through kind of the tension there, what this means for some of these Republicans on Capitol Hill. Before Mr. Trump has even stepped into that second term, they're having to think about, are they going to go against him in some way and not voting for these picks?
Well, look, it is difficult. His base is very loyal to the president-elect. That said, he's never going to be on a ballot again, Savannah. And so I think his ability to essentially, you know, hold that issue over the head of a senator, I think is not going to be as persuasive as it was, or it could be, if he was going to be on the ballot again, particularly for senators that are up in 26. Look, it depends on what your state you're from. I think those that are the redder the state, the more I think the president-elect and his base will be able to be a bit more persuasive to senators. But if you're from a state where the general election is the difference between whether you win or lose, a North Carolina, a Maine, things like that. I'm referring to a couple of senators who I expect to be opposing a lot of the president-elect's nominees. I think that's going to be a poll, too. So that's why I think there really is a smaller window than the president-elect believes when it comes to his ability to have political power and persuasion over his party.
Chuck, I wonder, I love the way that you're putting this, essentially like two mini terms, and somebody who does not have to campaign again, who maybe also, therefore, doesn't have to continue to appeal to a base in the way that he did to get elected again. Do you think that that means that anything in those 4 years kind of surprising happens? Something that maybe the president-elect, then president, will be thinking, you know what, I don't have to campaign again, but maybe it's not going to be so popular with my base, but might be more popular broadly?
I think it's very possible. I mean, look how close he came to cutting a deal with Chuck Schumer. That was DACA for the wall, if you recall, basically a pathway to citizenship for those that were brought here as children who were undocumented in exchange for essentially Democratic support to fund the wall. It was out there for a day or two. I think that was a real deal if Schumer would have done it, and I think he felt like it was a bit too much. And my guess is those around President Trump back then were relieved that he backed off, because it probably wouldn't have been popular with his base, and he was going to be on the ballot again. Look, it's possible, and I think the one thing about Donald Trump that can be good if you're supportive of him, can be bad if you're supportive of him but have real sort of long-held principles. He's transactional. Anything can be on the table at any given moment. It all depends on that moment. And so when I say that, that's why I think you will see why you're seeing a lot of people already right now looking like they want to work with him, because I think they all know he can be negotiated with. It just all depends on if you're willing to pay the price.
Chuck, Todd, we always appreciate you spending time with us. Good to see you. Thanks very much.
You got it. Thanks, Savannah.
Well, Thanksgiving, it's not until Thursday, but it's just a couple days away. And what's expected to be one of the busiest travel weeks in history is already in high gear. AAA predicts that nearly 80 million Americans will travel more than 50 miles from home over the holiday, with 90% of them driving to their destinations. However, several parts of the country are in for some rough weather, which could cause major delays and some dangerous conditions. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has the details from the New Jersey Turnpike. Hey, Emily.
Hey there. Well, Thanksgiving is the busiest holiday for travel. So perhaps unsurprisingly, we're expecting nearly 80 million people to crisscross the country to celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday over the next week or so. And the vast majority of them are doing this. They're hitting the road. They're getting behind the wheel. And one of the main motivating factors is the gas prices that we're seeing. Some of the lowest numbers in years. We're down about 25 cents compared to this time last year for the national average gallon of gas. Now, a point of concern for officials heading into this week is the bad weather. Over the weekend, we saw the West get pounded by heavy snow and heavy rain. Communities still reeling from that weather. It also snarled air travel. More than 17,000 flights were delayed or canceled since Friday. Unfortunately, there is more bad weather on the way for an even wider swath of the country, and it's could impact major airport hubs like D.C., Philadelphia, and New York. So experts say if you're looking to cut down on some of the trouble, some of the lines at the airports, you want to know what you can and perhaps more importantly cannot bring in your carry-on. If you can spread it, spill it, pour it, or pump it, officials say, then you cannot be bringing it in your carry-on. It is not a solid and it needs to be checked in your bag when it comes to those Thanksgiving fixings. One other thing that I will add, other modes of transportation are actually surging in popularity, including cruises. Cruise bookings, according to AAA, are up 20% compared to last year. Back to you.
All right, there you go. Emily, thank you so much. See you in a bit. Well, now let's get a check of our morning news now weather and find out what's in store for this week. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here. She's tracking those different systems that might impact your holiday travel. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, Savannah. Great to see you. And as Emily mentioned, we have two systems that we're watching. The first one is an early week storm. It's going to be on the weaker side. It's going to move off the coast the next couple of days. But for today, we're going to see some snow in the UP of Michigan, the northern Great Lakes, parts of the upper Midwest. And this is going to be a quick shot of rain as well. This will move off to the northeast tomorrow, bringing some beneficial rain to parts in the northeast. It's this coast-to-coast storm that's going to cause some issues by the northeast, into the northeast by Thanksgiving Day. Today, we are looking at once again at that valley rain, the mountain snow. This has been such an issue in the West. We've been so unsettled. So that California flood threat does continue. We're looking at accumulating snow for the Sierra Mountains, the Rockies, the Cascades, and we're looking at that Thanksgiving Day mess into the Northeast by Thanksgiving. So today and tomorrow, this is that first storm, the coast-to-coast storm developing, targeting the Rockies, the Cascades, also the Sierra Nevada Mountains, and we're going to see difficult travel because we'll see those winds really whipping as well. Then by Wednesday, we're going to see the storm intensifying. It's going to grow in size as well. So notice all this green down to the southeast, the Tennessee Valley, into parts of the interior parts in the northeast, also the Ohio Valley. But notice the pinks and blues also. We're going to see some freezing precipitation in parts of the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes. That's going to create some tricky travel. And then that blue, that is some snow. So yes, there'll be snow mixing in as well. And unfortunately, this is what Thanksgiving Day looks like. We have parades going on. We saw people traveling to their destinations. And we have the chance for precipitation from New England all the way down to portions of the Tennessee Valley into the southeast. We are looking at some snow even along the Great Lakes into the interior parts of the northeast, parts of New England as well. Bitterly cold in the northern plains, the upper Midwest. Temperatures only in the 20s, 34 in Casper. Sunny southwest, that's a nice day there. And we're looking dry. That's the good news in parts of the West with 60 degrees in San Francisco. If you're headed back after your Thanksgiving Day holiday, we are looking at lake effect snow on Friday throughout the Great Lakes. Really nice in the Northeast. We're looking at dry conditions there and then more snow, Savannah, in the northern plains or the Intermountain West. And that's going to move into the Central Plains by Saturday.
I just want some snow in New York.
I know. Wouldn't that be nice on Thanksgiving morning?
I know it would.
It'll be here.
Maybe soon. All right.
And then we'll be complaining about it.
I won't.
You love it?
Joe will.
I will.
Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
See you in a bit. Well, let's turn now to overseas news. Israel and Hezbollah traded heavy attacks over the weekend amid intensifying efforts to reach a ceasefire deal. On Saturday, Israel launched a powerful strike on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. It killed at least 29 people. And then on Sunday, Hezbollah retaliated by firing a barrage of rockets toward Israel, wounding several people. The Israeli military says most of the projectiles were intercepted, though some landed near Tel Aviv. And last night, the IDF carried out a new wave of airstrikes in Beirut, destroying multiple buildings, with the bombardment continuing this morning. We have NBC News correspondent Hala Gourani joining us from Jerusalem. Hala, good morning. So tell us about this deadly weekend in Lebanon. Tell us more about what we saw as this fire was exchanged between Hezbollah and Israel.
Well, Savannah, you outlined it there. It was an extremely deadly weekend with strikes in central Beirut by the Israeli military. It was a rarity just a few months ago for the IDF to strike in the central parts of the Lebanese capital. They focused more on the southern suburbs as well as on southern Lebanon. But now the Israeli military, as you mentioned, they're hitting some central neighborhoods, killing almost 30 people over the weekend. And in retaliation, and in that crossfire, Hezbollah launching more than 200 rockets into Israel, hitting the northern parts of Israel, central parts, but also as far south as on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. And this is all happening against that backdrop of speculation and reports and some statements from officials that we are nearing a potential ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah. Savannah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. Exactly, Hala. There'd been some progress there, right, over this potential ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel on that front of this war. This is following a visit to the region by a top U.S. envoy last week. Is there still optimism there? I mean, you just explained quite a deadly couple of days. What are we hearing this morning in light of that?
So in the statements, there's optimism. In practice and on the ground, there is actually an intensifying battle between the two sides. Now, Amos Hochstein is the U.S. envoy to the region. He has been reported as saying that we are closer to a deal than we were in the past. We also heard from the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Herzog, who told Army Radio that there are reasons to be optimistic about getting closer to a deal. That being said, we've heard that in the past. These could be statements and leaks that are made to try to put pressure on one side or the other. And certainly in practice and on the ground, we are not seeing any type of sort of lessening of the strike pattern from either side. In fact, it's quite the opposite, Savannah.
Hala, this morning we're also getting new warnings. This is just about the dire conditions within Gaza. UN, other aid groups, they're talking about conditions facing these displaced Palestinians as the seasons change. The first rains of the winter just arrived. Our NBC News crew in Gaza captured some of the conditions yesterday. What are we seeing?
So I am here in Jerusalem, and yesterday I can tell you that it was raining, that the winds were very strong. We were freezing here in Jerusalem, so you can only imagine, and we're dressed properly for the weather and we have shelter. So you can only imagine what it's like for people in makeshift tents and displaced people's camps, having to, for now more than a year, live in terrible conditions without sanitation, without running water, on sand, essentially, because one of the safe zones that has been struck, by the way, by IDF fire is essentially on a beach. They are really going through a tough time right now, and they're bracing for another brutal winter, Savannah.
All right, Hala, thank you very much for your reporting.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.